Hey, good evening. Happy New Year. First of all, let me say that because I think we're coming up to the point at which you don't say Happy New Year to folks anymore, which tends to be Orthodox Christmas and what have you. But I'm still going to say Happy New Year to everybody and welcome to the Privy Council. We have a full house today. Look at this. Full house. So everybody's really sort of ready for the new year and ready to hear from Mark about his successful effort to get the sequel done, and we're thrilled that he's chosen to come on and talk to us about that. So that's all good news. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about what's the outlook for 2023 financially, globally, economically, and the trend lines sort of building on our. And I'm nothing if not consistent, building on our trend lines of asymmetrical outcomes and risks, sort of what can go wrong this year, or what can go right this year, and what's that going to mean to folks. So we'll try to keep it light. We'll try to keep it on schedule. We'll try to make it entertaining. But Jim and I are going to have to carry a lot of water today, I think. So
yes.
So we'll see how that goes.
Huh?
What?
I think you just called the rest of us stupid, but
no, I did not. I did not.
Joe, I heard that, and I've fought this battle globally about you guys. Not going to happen today.
That's okay, because one morning Scott literally did call the rest of us half-wits. So,
man, that hurt coming from Scott. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, right? Of all people.
Ronaldo, welcome back, bud. How are you?
Hey, I'm well.
Yeah,
good to be here.
Good to see you, Joseph.
I have a question.
Every time I turn my computer on, you're looking back at me.
Yeah, I was going to say the same to you, but if a Mark Sibley hasn't actually published a sequel, is he really
come
here?
Come on. This is. I'm going to do this because I think I'm empowered to do it. I have to go back and look at the bylaws.
Look at he's stretching for spooning. This is awesome.
I almost wore that same hoodie. I'm really glad I didn't.
Yeah, right.
You know what? Me too. But I'm going to just declare a general amnesty unless there's some other act that occurs that casts this whole story into doubt. I think we're going to declare an amnesty on all of the shit that we've all collectively shoveled at Mark over the 9 years that it took to write the sequel.
It's like a fraction of that, and you're a fraction of the groups out there that have been giving me crap for that.
I sort of gave up on it. I didn't want to pile on after a period of time. But Mark, tell us where we're at. Tell us what's the process look like, as they say in Canada.
Yeah, so thanks for giving me the spot here, and I know you. I was on the first show and haven't been back since. It's been a busy holiday. My goal was to finish writing the sequel, which is tentatively called A Dance of Devils. I say tentatively because you never know what happens, but that's what I want to call it. So I finished it on. I wrote about 5,200 words. On New Year's Eve, starting at 5 a.m. at a Starbucks, transitioning to my other coffee shop when it opened at 7, and wrote until about 12:30. And that's the most words I've written in one day, obviously. Normally, I do about 800 to 1,500 words a day. But finished it. It was also my 25th wedding anniversary, so I didn't have all day to finish it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. But
it sounds like events sort of came together in a way that lined up, and
well, I kind of did,
and got it done. Right?
Well, I was motivated because I was tired of hearing about it. So
my work here is done.
Do what?
My work here is done. Then.
Yeah. See, I had to take some time out to go drink bourbon and cuddle with Joe in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. And work and kids and all that stuff. So anyway, where was I going with this? So anyway, it's done. It's with my editor, and he is trying to figure out exactly how to edit it for what purpose, right? So we're thinking we may just try and go traditional this time, since I have Mongol Moon in my back pocket, and this is another one, and we've come up with a game plan, and that game plan includes an outline and a bunch of pages for the the third chapter in this trilogy, and that has been started now. So it's good to have in my back pocket to have started it. So things are
do you have interest in sort of taking the Jack Carr route here, or other guys like that, in terms of optioning this to somebody to produce it into either a series or a film? Or, do you care about that, or
pay me?
Yeah. Okay.
I have still lots of college to pay for, and wouldn't like to keep working for the man my entire life. But there's trade-offs here, right? So in learning about traditional publishing and agents and all that kind of stuff, I've gotten a big education in that. And you're still kind of working for the man. You're still working under a deadline.
Yeah, you just work.
It's a better deadline. I'm doing what I love, right? Instead of other stuff. But I'm notoriously slow writer, as everybody knows. So trying to write this to an outline and a deadline is going to be a challenge, and we're going to hopefully do that. But if that doesn't work out, it's going to be edited anyway. I've already got the cover. So if I go the other route, then it'll be out sooner. So,
but you never know. Hold that thought. We're going to come back in a minute once we finish going through with the rest of the panel for introductions, and then ask you what you can talk about in the way of the arc of the story, or not, as the case may be, in terms of being comfort, because we all sort of know where we left off in Mongol Moon, and everybody who's read the book has got characters that they like, and some more than others, and one thing or another. So anything that you can share, we'd be happy to hear about it. But I'm going to let Mike say hello from Whistler, British Columbia.
From Whistler.
Yeah,
I'm still here.
And the rumor is that Mike has had an anniversary of his birth recently. We don't know which one, but we want to wish him
the one
happy
where
birthday.
I got older.
Yeah.
Happens to all of us,
It does indeed.
You have been dying since the day you were born, son.
Correct.
Snow quality at Whistler is still good?
It really has not been a banner year for quantity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ron, I see what you're saying there. Again, it's all kind of relative. I mean, if you're used to East Coast shit skiing, this is heaven. It has not been horrible, but their volume of snow is probably lower than the norm for the 4th of January. So kind of hoping it picks up. Kind of hoping, because it just makes it's a little more fun, when you're not trying to cling on the edge, of ice. If you have powder and stuff to plow through, it's a lot easier.
Are you still alternating downhill and cross country?
Yeah. Like today, I went cross country, which is, I think, better exercise overall. And it's a totally different vibe as far as the kind of people. Usually an older crowd. And it's funny because you talk to some folks and they're like, and this was one, she's, I don't know, 30, so she's still young, but she's like, yeah. And I think she was from, she works in the ski shop thing. And she's like, she's from Austria or, something like that. She said, yeah, I just get tired of lift lines.
I thought she was going to say she likes older men.
Well, that too.
Yeah, okay.
But depends on the older man,
Yeah,
so.
indeed.
Right. Yeah, so having fun.
See, if I were If I were out in Whistler, I'd just be sitting there on a porch somewhere drinking a bourbon.
I can't do that. I mean, I'll do the après ski, and I'll have a drink. I just don't. There we go. We start talking about this sort of thing, and
do we have a moderator to step in on this stuff?
Yeah,
I've already killed it. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I had a sense.
but I mean, you still have a there. If you ever go to Whistler, anyone listening, it's a great place. But there is one particular lift that has become my favorite over the years, and it's on the Black Comb Mountain. If you don't know, Whistler is comprised of two separate mountains. You have Whistler Mountain, you have Black Comb Mountain, and I want to say Cat Skinner, and that's not it. It's not coming to me. But there's it's in the name and I can't remember it. But there's a hut at the top. Anyone that's gone to Ranger,
Prevagen,
Yeah,
it works.
That works, yeah. Anyone that's gone to Ranger School understands the connection of Dahlonega, Georgia to blueberry pancakes, and this place is very much like it, where they have waffles. It's absolutely fantastic. It's not the Horseman Hut; it's another one, but it's definitely like one of the best places to go, and it has probably the best view because it's kind of on the north curve of the northernmost mountain. So you just have this panoramic looking up the valley of all these mountain tops, and it's completely unobstructed. It's just a completely beautiful place to be. So if you ever go to Whistler, go to that place that I can't tell you where it is. How's that?
It sounds like a Warlock challenge to me.
I'll think of it eventually. God damn it.
James, how are you, my man?
All good. Enjoying a beautiful sunny day in Central Virginia in the winter. Joke.
Yeah.
It's definitely winter. So yeah, life's good. Starting the new year and enjoying watching things begin to spin in Asia and things begin to spin in Latin America, and people asking questions about new currencies that are spinning up everywhere and new mechanisms to buy things that are not dollar denominated. So all of our discussions last year were not in vain.
So your clientele is asking those questions then in real time now in response to what we've seen.
I don't know why they're responding, but it's popping up everywhere now. And I'm watching non-traditional relationships begin to be the norm.
Right.
So, you and I have been talking for the last couple of years, Stan, on the side about alternative economic models. And by God, if they aren't as close to being viable as they've ever been. And there's just a lot of talk about it. And we get the article that got punched up on the conflict site today about Brazil. It's, if Latin Americans are talking about alternative currencies to sell commodities in, then that it's being primed elsewhere.
Well, the history of people who wanted to be the successor to Simon Bolivar is pretty long, but it hasn't worked yet. But we'll see what happens.
But the BRICS are going to make a good run for it. I think.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I think they are. I think they have
growing,
to.
Aren't they?
Yeah, I think they have to, and I think that one of the things that's happened in this Ukraine war sanctions regime is it's proven to them that they don't have to give a shit about SWIFT, really, and that's sort of really made this possible in terms of talking about alternative currencies. So we'll get into that as we talk.
Absolutely.
Mr. Matt, my brother.
Yes, sir.
What's up? What's going on?
Well, just another week since we talked last. Another week at number one on Amazon. Amazon's top 1,000 with the Gorilla's Guide to Baofeng Radio, and just enjoying life. enjoying life, enjoying some time with the family. Currently writing a handbook on signals intelligence, specifically low-level voice intercept, and very similar form factor to the Gorilla's Guide to the Baofeng Radio. Something that can be utilized as a handbook in the field, and something sort of like an easier to read field manual. About 50% of the way done with that, and should be done by the end of this month. And I'm going to get cracking on a book on HF radio or skywave radio for international communications. And for anybody that's listening to this, you guys, a few of y'all in here, not saying who it was, jumped out after the show last time. You were like, I'm totally done hearing about the commo stuff, and I don't blame you. When I get going, it goes deep. But it's all of these books are written literally from the ground up. And, does anybody hear that buzzing noise? Anyway, I was just making sure it wasn't me. But it's literally written from the ground up, assuming that you know nothing and taking you from 0 to 100. The same that we do with classes that are on the training schedule. So a lot of great things on this front, and a lot of good stuff that's going on down here, and just really enjoying life.
Well, good to hear. Good to hear. And Watcher, what's new with you?
Oh, just working on a lot of projects. What can I say?
A lot of plates spinning in a lot of different directions.
You hear it.
Good.
All right.
Good. All right. So let's come back to Mr. Sibley and ask him what he can tell us a little bit about the broad brush sort of storyline here. If we were gonna ask you to film a 1 minute, 30-second sort of trailer for the story, what can you tell us without having to kill us?
Yeah, so I can tell you that some of the main characters switch. There were a lot of secondary characters in the first book that people really seem to enjoy, and I actually seem to enjoy more. Yep, and they step up, and they're going to continue on. And we got some of the main characters that are still there, that are doing a bit different things, going different places. And then I think one of the things that I enjoyed doing, and that people were like confused by at first, and then kind of dug, was the fact that in Mongol Moon, I introduced the Marines and Alice, the main battle tank, kind of halfway through, right? Maybe a third or more through. I can't remember just how much. I think that's a rule. That's a rule you don't break when you write novels. You kind of introduce everybody up front. But I did it again in the sequel, and I did it because somebody will follow on here, Airborne Heel, kept bugging me after he read Mongol Moon. He was just, I'm disappointed there was no Airborne in it. So there's Airborne in it, and I had to give him a reason to be there, right? So So I had to give him a mission. They had to have a mission, and we had to go for it. And then hijinks ensue. So, but yeah, there's a lot of cool things that happen, and I will tell you that there are quite a number of loose ends that I had to keep track of. So that's another reason why it took me a bit of time. I had to track those down and make sure I got them all. But most tied up, at least satisfactorily for me. Not as many left for the final, and I might have even left it where it'd be okay without a third book, but I'll write it. So, but the tank's still there, and there's probably a few other things that pop in and pop out real quick that I just had to do. So they're fun. This one was funner to write than, or more funner. Go ahead.
No, so who's our antagonist at this point? I mean, we knew who it was through the end of the first book, but has that morphed at all in terms of how you've written this? Or
another antagonist stepped up, and that's Boris the Wolf. He was the one that got our 3 astronauts out of Kazakhstan.
Got
I
it.
stole his plane to get home. Unfortunately, plane was full of drugs. War is very profitable. So he
I
comes
think we're
looking.
learning that.
He comes looking, and he's got a pretty interesting compatriot that comes with him. So another loose end to tie up. But that's about all I'm going to get into. But there are more nukes. I'll tell you that. That's
Okay.
fun.
Is there more
And
Chinese schwacking going to go on? Because there was some Iranian schwacking, but no Chinese schwacking in the first one. So.
Oh, it's all Chinese this time. It's
Okay.
all Chinese. It's all Chinese, and it's back and forth too. It's back and forth across rivers. It's back. They're in the Shenandoah. It's the Battle of the Shenandoah, Joe.
Appalachia Stan is nowhere to attempt this.
No.
So, How much trouble did you have writing all the love scenes there, Mark?
Between the Marines?
Where's a bayonet
much.
when you need one?
Not much. No, I steer clear of that. I stick to puppies and clowns and nuclear bombs and tanks. That's my forte. I stay away from the mushy stuff. I don't like to write.
Oh, okay.
So
You say is that for
I
real
don't.
life?
Yeah. See, Mike's got it.
So Mark, if
They'll put
if
it
I were
down
to
on paper.
I were to ask you to sort of dangle the time frame, and I know it's dependent upon traditional publishing versus self-publishing, but when realistically should folks be looking to do this, and are you going to, you're going to reserve copies for people, or what's the mechanism to put this thing into people's hands at this point, and your preferred timeline?
My preferred timeline would be quickly.
Yeah.
So, because that's just me. I like instant gratification. But there's some other business financial things that I have to consider. Right. So, so I'm hoping this year. I'm hoping this year is it. And I'm hoping it's sooner in the year than later. But sometimes
You got to make Christmas. You got to make Christmas this year.
That's the goal, but I want it to be quicker than even that.
Right.
So it's going to be one way or the other, and if things don't work out, then I'll do it myself, just like I did Mongol Moon. But I'm a fan of fail fast. So let's get out there. Let's do some things, and if it doesn't look like it's going to happen, then pull cord.
And have you thought about, or did you do, or maybe this is still to be done, depending upon how you decide to publish this, or are you going to illustrate this at all in the way of, because people want to understand, they have a view in their mind as to what these key characters that they like, what they look like, at least in their mind. Are you going to sort of pull the curtain back and put faces to these folks, or what's the thought process?
I don't. No. I don't think that I would want to do that for people.
Okay. I
think people can do that themselves. I don't want to take what's out of their brain. It kind of ruins it for me when I have these visions of a book that I've read, and then they adapt it, and now those people that are much less vivid than what I read.
And Danny DeVito plays the character that you really liked, and
oh my god, yeah,
sort of disappointing,
right, exactly. Right.
I think Danny
It's
DeVito plays
Joe's
me
kind
in
of like the
book.
Wheel of Times that they did on Amazon.
Yes.
Two-way.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on that, dude. Why would you even bring that up?
Yeah. I knew it would irritate you.
Just your subject.
Yeah. No. What I would love though is fan illustrations. There are people out there that have already sent me some illustrations of Alice and some other things that are pretty damn cool. So, and the artist that did the cover was amazing. So
did you get instant gratification from the depictions of Alice?
Yeah, I actually got instant gratification from the.
Why do we let Ron on the show?
Which, do what? Stop it, Ron.
Because Sibley sits there, he just slow pitches these things, and I'm going like, Dude, I was a home run champ in T-ball. Now, come on, man.
Teed that up and nailed it out of the park.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty much. And it's late, and I've been up since 5, so I'm brain dead anyway. Yeah, yeah.
God, what a whiner.
Stop it. I am a whiner.
Well, we are thrilled that you're here, and I know you've got a hot toddy waiting for you someplace. But you're welcome to hang as long as you want to hang, and comment where you think it's appropriate. But heartfelt congratulations in terms of getting this to here. I really feel happy for you, and I know that the level of bullshit, although well-intended bullshit, but the level of bullshit that you have to wade through every day is diminished, and
You know what?
will only get smaller.
It has not diminished. It's like they ask me on Twitter, what am I going to harass you about now? And everybody else jumps on the third one, right? So
Yeah, I'm going to give you about a week and a half,
ending.
and then I'm right back at number 3. Stan started. He says, now you will have 2/3 of a great novel.
Well, it is. When you put them all 3 together, it's a nice big book.
Very sort of John le Carre like, right? The search for Carla. Yeah. Three of the best spy.
Thanks for letting me to come on here and talk about manga.
Oh, you're welcome anytime. I think you know that.
Yeah,
I think you are. You know that.
It's fun. I wish I had something to provide, but
have you got the cover art handy? Can you flash that real quick? Or no?
I might talk amongst yourselves. Let me sort this out.
When you're ready, just say something, and we'll move on from there. So
Gotcha.
we're gonna let Mark look that up, and then this is gonna be where we sort of pivot to tonight's topic, and tonight's topic is a look at the economy for 2023 and sort of where we stand, where a lot of smart people think we stand, and I'll tell you right now that the variance of opinion in terms of what's going to happen in 2023 is very wide and very, very broad, and really smart people are coming out at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of what's going on. But we're going to try to help you make sense of this, and hopefully try to help you figure out what you ought to be doing in terms of response to what may be the outcomes of what could be a pretty volatile year. And if you've been watching the show, you know that we're always focused on risk and asymmetric aspects of risk. So here's an interesting factoid, and that is the global economy surpassed $100 trillion for the first time in 2022. But we think that it's going to stall a bit in 2023. And the nice Russian lady who runs the International Monetary Fund is telling us that we're pretty sure that a goodly portion of the globe is going to go into recession. And when asked why, she was able to come up with the sort of unarguable reason that the 3 biggest economies, the US, the EU, and China, are all slowing down simultaneously. So that's, if you aspire to run a multilateral financial institution and be responsible for hundreds of billions of dollars, that's all it takes, apparently, is just to be able to say, if the big 3 are slowing down, then we're probably going to have a recession. And then she gets into what I think is the canard of 2023. And everybody who's talking about the U.S. may avoid a recession and a soft landing and everything like that, I think is hopium that the media is. I think you have to sort of pitch that in order to get attention in today's media. But a couple folks switched places this year. India is now in the top 5 in terms of economies, having replaced the UK, I think it was. So that's new in terms of, and you'll see why. I mean, India is really maybe the country to be reckoned with in the next 5 to 10 years that not a lot of people are paying attention to, but you'll see that India's got a lot of things going for it, not least of which is Russian crude at a 30% discount. That helps make a lot of things possible in terms of how to run an economy. But that's kind of where that is. Let's move on then to the next piece of this. And I'm going to ask you guys to jump in because I don't want this. This is not my master's thesis, and I don't want to monopolize this conversation. So please comment where you wish to. Interest rates. Anybody who's in the market for a home or wants to sell a home knows what's going on with interest rates. Well, that's a global phenomenon. So 26 of the 31 major central banks in the world have all raised interest rates in 2022. And that's all being done, so they tell us, to fight inflation, which has also been on the rise in 2022, not just in the United States, but also in other major economies, and to a degree also in emerging markets. Although you'll see that this is very different form factor in some places relative to the developed economies. But rising interest rates seem to be the regime. The only place where that's not going on is Turkey, where Erdogan, who's both head of state, head of the central bank, and I think generalissimo of the army, but I'm maybe not sure about that last one, has convinced his central bank that the answer to inflation is to cut interest rates in Turkey, and he and the Japanese are going in a slightly different direction. In his case, it's not bearing any fruit. In their case, it's at least doing no harm. Jim, you follow this. I mean, what the hell is Erdogan doing in Turkey?
He's taking advantage of the massive discounts on the stuff that they're playing with, and trying to achieve the low interest rates by
he's borrowing a lot of money. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, they're the perfect middleman for the region, right? And they're kind of operating on the dark side of the economy. But you pointed out the Indians. What you have is non-alignment right now is a great thing to have, right? So India's historically ridden that non-alignment model really well, and in this case, it suits them very well because they can say, we're just buying oil, or we're just buying coal, or we're just we're buying commodity X, and geez, we got a great deal on this stuff in Dubai or afloat somewhere in the South Atlantic. They don't really care, and they're able to play in those markets because they're in that non-aligned role, and they'll keep working with the Russians and the Chinese on this kind of thing. It just suits them.
Well, the Straits of Bosphorus are a magical place. Because there are things that can go on in the Straits of the Bosphorus with respect to origins and nature of commodities that are transshipped there, and that is, I've seen shipments of soybeans from Russia go in one end of the Bosphorus Straits and come out as organic soybeans from Alabama, and not having changed ships, but the paperwork just manages to conform. So it's a
magical place.
It's a magical place. It's sort of like Hogwarts. Anything can happen. And so the Turks know how to take full advantage of that stuff. And it used to be Russian crude that was produced by ISIS in Syria, came out across the border with Erdogan's son and was shipped on to something else. So all sorts of things happen in that nice big marketplace that they have in Istanbul.
Yeah, and if you're skimming 30 points in a transaction on commodities, you're good.
Yeah, if you've got the room to take that,
you got the room to take possession risk, which is what's killing the Western organizations that are trying to do clean hand commodity work. You're looking to make 3 points, 4 points.
Yeah, I once had to explain. We had an investment in a seafood company in the Northwest United States whose big claim to fame was tracking the origin of your fish that you bought at Costco.
You don't want to know.
No, and there was a code. There was a code and a website that you could go, and there was this sort of, I'm going to call it fictitious. I don't want to slander anybody, but there was this sort of story of how I got my fish. My fish was a happy fish in the Bering Sea, and the next thing you know, he got caught in a net, and then we took him to this town in Alaska, and then this was the cold chain from there, and I had to explain that to a Turkish guy one day, and he looked at me like I was. And he said, "Why would we want to do that? I mean, that's insane." It's
Exactly.
a fish. You want to eat the fish, eat the fish.
So the American dominance of country of origin in the commodity world, it's a pipe dream. So enforcing these rules has become extremely difficult when such a large percentage of the global market for a lot of these commodities is
Couldn't care
operating
shit.
in a
It just
gray
doesn't
market.
care. Yeah.
It
Doesn't care. It doesn't want to be burdened with the information.
Well, they're in the business of moving oil and coal and wheat, and when the United States gets involved, it gets much more expensive and much less profitable and much higher risk. And then they come to you and they ask where the money on the front came from and the money on the back is going. And everybody throws their hands up and says, it's just easier not to talk to the Americans. And I think that's kind of the pathway that we've got is, we can't get into transactions anymore because we're just not welcome at the table.
Well, and you're going to see that theme play itself out over the course of this conversation, that we've effectively ring fenced ourselves.
Yep.
We don't need to be tariffed any longer. We've just made our involvement in a lot of international transactions so unpalatable by virtue of all of the compliance aspects that we ask of people that they just stopped out. They just stopped out. Watcher, can I have the next slide then, please? We'll keep moving. So the broad sort of economic outlook for 2023 is variably described as a gloomy outlook by most folks. Not all, but most. And I think what I would point you to here, I'm not going to read a bunch of numbers. It's nice to have the colored map there because you can just sort of glance at that and see blue is bad. The brighter the orange, the higher the annual change in gross domestic product. And as we said, India looks pretty good. Indonesia looks pretty good. And something that you'll see quite a bit of as we go through here, and that is there are countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are doing pretty damn well from a
is that DRC and Kenya?
Yeah. And so those are often sort of specific stories about what's going on there. And surprisingly, I think it's because they can't go any lower. I think we've got a dead cat bounce in Venezuela in 2023. Either that or that's the sum total of Chevron going back down to turn the pumps back on in certain fields.
I think you pointed out earlier on.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, Mike.
You pointed out, I think on Twitter, someone did. Zimbabwe clearly is feeling its oats, where they're saying, no lithium ores will be taken out of the country unrefined. In other words, you will, we, Zimbabwe, will host.
We are your partner.
Yeah. We will host your actual production here.
But you're going to have to send us the workers because we don't have anyone capable of doing it.
Yeah, but you know what? That's and I think I said this at the time. That's really smart because it's you want to capture that next rung in the value add chain, and all those countries have had decades of experience as being the low cost commodity raw material producer and sort of waving bye-bye to the real value that gets created with that stuff. It started in coffee and has progressed to other places. But I somebody at the IMF or the Asian Development or the African Development Bank or something got a hold of the right people. What's his name? The former guy, never would have thought of that because
Mugabe.
Mugabe. He was happy just skimming off the top and didn't give a shit about anything else. So nice to see Rhodesia starting to be maybe.
I was just going to say there's a new slogan in town: "Make Zimbabwe Rhodesia again."
Yeah, Cecil Rhodes is grinning from someplace. That's no question about that. But look, I mean, Montana's having that same conversation in the context of being one of the better beef producers. There's no there's no ability to capture that next rung of value creation and some of the other commodities that are produced. So it's a problem that a lot of bulk commodity producers want to try to crack, and particularly with lithium, it's they're the guys with the right stuff at the right time, as Mike can tell you.
Well, it all makes sense. I mean, we're having the kids dig it out of the ground. We might as well let the adults work in the refinery process.
Yeah, yeah. So the chart on the left, there's a couple of lines that I drew that are sort of countries or groups of countries of interest. But I think what you see is the trend on major economies, and this is work that's been done by the Asian Development Bank, but it's global in nature. And you see that in 2022 for advanced economies, the first look in September of 2020 was 1.9%, and in December of last year they sort of revised that up, and it's rolled over for 23. Their first look at GDP growth for advanced economies was at 1% for 2023, and then we're now down below 50 basis points. And you'll see that sort of play out across the realm. And the Chinese numbers have been effectively cut in half since 2021. And I'm not sure they're going to be that strong, but I'll let Jim speak to China, what he thinks and we'll get into that in much more detail on the 18th when we do our big Year of the Rabbit look forward. But I think China is one of the big variables that touches so much of what's going to happen in 2023 in terms of commodity demand, oil demand, and industrial output. I have a hard time believing that Foxconn's going to step up, as they're saying, the level of iPhone production in China to the degree that they're talking about. I think we won't know it till next year, but the blowback on this lack of COVID zero policy is going to be significant.
Well, Stan, one of the things I see in the map on the right
Mm.
is as China shrinks, large percentages relative to the small economies. So Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, they pick up an immense amount of people bailing out of China, right?
Well,
So-
and some of that bailing out of China is sleight of hand, as you know.
Oh no, but same. This doesn't count who the owners are. It may be
Right.
the same owners that owned in China. It may be Chinese owners, but it's relocating to those Southeast Asian economies.
Mhm.
But the horizontal stuff, the East-West stuff, is all commodity driven. And if you look at Africa, you look at the redoubling of efforts by Xi in January. We talked about it last year. They're going to come out and do the happy time, and hey, we're back and everything's good. And you're seeing a restarting of the rail activities in Africa. But I think the way to look at the Zimbabwe thing is probably that there's a chosen China-based partner for that facility
Mhm.
that already owns the right to do it, and it'll be built behind a ring fence. They'll have their own security. They'll have their own in and out, and it'll probably be a structured joint venture that's controlled by the Chinese financer, and there'll be money that flows sideways to the domestic partners. But I don't see them changing the model much. I see them marketing the model in a more palatable way for the African political needs, and I think the Saudis are going to be involved heavily in Africa in the next coming year, and they'll back up this development push, and they'll supply things that the Chinese can't. And we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that was a significant portion of the recent talks between Xi and MBS. Is
Yep.
How do we tag team Africa to the extent that we need?
Well,
need
and Russia's involvement too, right? And
Yeah.
I see that on the map there. Mali is one of the places going to grow the most, and we know now that Wagner is running some of the gold mines. So
Production quotas will be met.
They will be met at the point barrel of a gun.
No question about it. That colonel's got lots of new camouflage stuff he wants to buy, so he's
Yeah.
And there's comfort there with state-owned enterprises, right? I mean, if you look across the map again, India has state-owned enterprises. Indonesia's had state-owned enterprises. Those governments aren't afraid of state-owned enterprise. Same in the Middle East. It's more like family-owned enterprise, but you have really tight central control over the assets. And so when somebody comes in, it's going to be a state-owned enterprise out of China that's going to be your partner in something. Nobody rolls their eyes, right? And when that gets easier than dealing with the banks in Europe or the US or Japan, you'll begin to see patterns like this of economic flow and growth.
So you're saying that Credit Saud's going to open an office in Kenya, you think, in Nairobi?
I'm going to guess they probably own a bank already.
Don't doubt that at all.
Yeah.
Don't doubt that at all. Next slide, please. Oop. Okay, so a little bit more on Asia, because Asia is going to be a pivotal aspect of so much of 2023. Rapidly growing area, and if you look at the revised growth rates for some of these countries, a lot of down arrows. In particularly as we look into 2023 and the December revisions that the Asian Bank did there, we see further step downs in terms of GDP. But these are numbers that Europe in particular would kill for. I mean, you'll see in when we take a look at the EU, what appears to be quite a bit of volatility in terms of what they expect in terms of both recession and recovery for 2023. But it's all in a cocked hat because it all occurs within a range of 50 basis points of growth one way or the other. I mean, Hong Kong is only going to grow at 4.7%, so they say, down from 5.5%. But I mean, the United States would kill for GDP growth like that. So, but it's interesting that what you do see though is that India looks like the strong horse for 2023, and I'll point out to you on the right hand side, this is the PMI, or the sort of Purchasing Managers Index, sort of forward look at what companies are seeing in their order books, and you'll see that and I don't know how much of this Nancy Pelosi was responsible for in the fourth quarter, but you look at Taiwan, and it's tough sledding in Taiwan right now, both in terms of export orders in the blue at the bottom, and in terms of the Purchasing Managers Index look ahead as to what's going to happen in the Taiwanese economy. And that takes us right back to what I continue to say is going to be one of the big pivot points for 2023, and that withered Taiwan. And if this would be the opportune time to sort of really double down on Taiwan if you're the Chinese, mainland Chinese. If you've got deteriorating order books and Foxconn struggling to meet production and one thing and another, and TSMC's got to put $40 billion in the desert in Arizona in order to sustain its survivability, a blockade would be a really interesting thing to do at this particular point. So we'll come back to that at a later point. So Asia, off at the peaks, weaker dollar is going to help a little bit. And on a relative basis, which is the next slide, looks like one of the better houses in the neighborhood. So, Einstein said it's all relative, and this sort of bears that out. So here's sort of in the red dashed box is developing Asia and expectations for GDP growth, 22 and 23, which you actually see real growth in developing Asia. And inflation that is sub 5%, and actually ticking down just a modest amount for 2022, 2023, which most folks would say that's not a bad outlook for the year. And let's look at that with emerging and developing Europe. Now, I struggle, and maybe you guys can help me. I struggle with what that means anymore.
I think it means
Ukraine. Yeah, Ukraine's certainly in that box. But I mean, the other post-Soviet economies have been around long enough that I don't know what that really means, unless we're talking about Kosovo or Moldova, North Macedonia. That's sort of meaningless. But you see that whatever falls into that emerging and developing Europe has got a tough 2023 to look at, and that growth is not going to be much, but inflation is going to remain amongst the highest regions in the world. So
I think the gold box isn't the gold box EBRD.
Yeah, but see, EBRD has sort of been on hold for a long time, so I don't know what that means. I think they may just be trolling for Ukraine there.
But it is a gold box.
It is a goal, and that's probably accurate in the context of our friends in Ukraine. So, anyhow, all right, the EU, and this looks like an awfully dynamic period of time over this period of time. Okay, and it's a fun chart. It's colored up nicely. The guys at Oxford Economics do a nice job, and they've got fourth quarter of 2022, which is now behind us, and the first quarter of 2023, and that's the extent of the recession in Europe. And Europe rebounds in the latter half of 2023, and this has been tattooed on the inside of the eyelids of every member of the European Central Bank, and they can say this in their sleep without missing a beat. But I think it's all sort of bullshit. I don't think they're going to be that lucky.
As you put there in red, note the narrow band.
Yeah,
They're
this all
trying to
happens
make
within
this
a
chart
teacup.
look like something it's not.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's this robust recovery back to less than 1% GDP growth.
Of less than 1%. Yeah.
So
that's not modest. That's infinitesimal.
Yeah. So and that's why we're only doing one slide, because I just don't think that Europe is going to be a major impact in terms of this economic story in 2023, other than what we'll get to later, which is please send us money, mom and dad. Latin America, pretty volatile. But again, if you look at the box, we're not seeing a lot of robust growth in Latin America, and political uncertainty is certainly going to weigh on what's happening in Latin America. But again, not too bad in terms of
where Brazil goes, Latin America goes.
Yep.
And it's about to go into the tank.
Yeah, I think they're going to finish the journey to be Venezuela. And that's not, as we've seen in Venezuela, that's not been a good place to be, despite whatever the IMF thinks that Venezuela is going to do in 2023. So a lot of internal shake and bake reorganization. We talked about this elsewhere today on future conflict in terms of this emerging currency confederation amongst the Bolivarian countries in Latin America. Watch this space, we'll see, but I don't think we're going to see much good come out of this. I even think we'll see diminished agriculture production out of Argentina and Brazil because of the uncertainties associated with the political and social structures there. We'll see. Anybody else got a thought on Latin America?
Yeah, I think the upside is the high yield productivity of their commodity businesses. China and India keep buying if it's commodity based, and they'll keep selling if it's commodity.
And one of the things that's key to that, and this is going to tie this thread together for us, is that the outputs or the means of output for all that stuff is increasingly going to be, and you'll see this later in the deck, is increasingly going to be in Chinese hands in terms of the infrastructure investments that Belt and Road or China itself has made in Latin America begins to mirror what's going on in other places. So it's sort of the opposite of what the folks in Zimbabwe have said, and that is they aren't even going to control their own means of export in Latin America.
Well, the logistics piece is falling out of favor for them, because there are only a few options for large scale logistics. But the Chinese are giving the Argentines the ability to process proteins and to go through the milling process there instead of just buying raw beans. So I think that small pieces of business are going to be handed out in this next Chinese wave in a way that hasn't been done before, but it'll go into very select hands in countries that are strategically important, and they'll get an overly large access to the market.
It will be nothing compared to what it could have been had they managed their own destiny.
Yep, exactly.
So it's going to be selected folks who are reliable from a Chinese perspective, and they'll be allowed to make a certain amount of money, and then they'll be harvested like Jack Ma. So
Yeah, put to pasture.
put to pasture. Sub-Saharan Africa.
So before we
Yeah.
move off I had asked rhetorically because I know the answer, but if I was an American looking at this,
Mhm.
even in the political realm, and I said, I need to look at my foreign policy and look at targets where I think I'm going to get the best return for my investment. And I had $54 billion to just fritter away. Would I look at Africa as being the number one target, or would I look at Latin America based on that little slide you just showed? In relative terms, they're not hitting the same success. They're in the doldrums, in comparison. So where would I put my money?
A couple answers to that. Receptivity of American investment in the Latin American countries is more and more difficult.
Yeah.
Not the least of which is as Jim likes to talk about, our compliance regime, which means you can't do business anywhere other than Minnesota, because you can't do the things that are necessary to achieve transactional success in these countries. You don't have the flexibility of, state actor talking to state actor or state sponsored actor, not looking at what you're really doing to make sure that the brother-in-law of the generalissimo is a board of directors member for something else. This is other than Joe Biden, who has a pass around all that stuff, and members of the Biden family. It's hard to compete because you're playing with one hand at least tied behind your back. But that's going to be the same in either Latin America or in Africa. I think
I want to normalize it by saying those kind of constraints we would have dealt with, deregulate or whatever, to kind of change that paradigm to get us on even footing. And then I go back to my question.
Okay. It depends upon when you want.
In other words, I'm in total fucking fantasy land.
Okay, so I understand, but so we'll extend that metaphor a little further and say, I think it depends upon what your timeline is for maximizing the investment. I think that shorter term, you're probably better off in Latin America. But for the longer term, I think Africa is probably the most interesting. But there's just a lot of risk.
And I'll make it even worse.
Yeah.
For just to be a pain in the ass. The connecting tissue of interest to these Latin American markets is the border of the United States and things south. I mean, so all that kind of stuff kind of plays into this idea of where we're going to place our bets, because Africa is over there, with an ocean in between.
Yep.
And there's other countries of great power whose power is compounding because they're gathering together, that are closer to these other places that have stuff. So
so I think your point is one that I think an element of your question is, and we ought to give a shit about trying to reinstitute the Monroe Doctrine. There's some of that embedded in your question, I think. And so, I think that's true. And we probably should be more masters of our own domain for Seinfeld fans. In the context of Latin America, because those people can walk to here, and they do it every day. And we give them the Matador defense, and on they come. So it's pretty interesting in that regard. But I think we have to care about Latin America. I think we've seeded Latin America to the point where despite the fact that they're operating at the end of their logistical chain, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and others are now fairly comfortable, Mike, in Latin America. I mean, they've been there, they've been there for a long time. Hezbollah's been in South America for a long time now.
I mean, Hezbollah has their own Minister of Internal Security and Petroleum in Venezuela.
Yeah. So I think we're behind the 8 ball in both cases. I think the really interesting response would be to say, what do we have to do to be relevant player in Latin America again, as opposed to what the Biden administration has decided to do, and that's throw $500 billion at 51 dictators in Africa just to buy a couple, buy a year and a half's worth of favor.
I'm sure you saw that I'm being transparent.
Yep.
My point is, with diminishing resources, meaning money,
yep.
We need to make a choice. We are no longer so rich. We're not this rich nation that has just money coming out of our orifices. We're $30+ trillion in debt, and we need to make some choices as to where we do make these investments. And I'm sure Jim probably would agree to that.
Is that pre-Ukraine budget or post-Ukraine budget?
Because there's a difference.
I agree with you, but I mean, I'm talking real time.
Yeah, I think just to get onto Mike's thread of thought here, we have a limited amount of capital. We've operated in a massive surplus mindset for 30, 40 years, right? And again, we've talked about this, which is
money printer goes burr.
It is like the minigun, right? They're great, but before you know it, you've gone through 1,000 rounds, and geez, you got to go get more. We really have to be selective, Mike, and we have to be selective on a strategic level. And one of the big mistakes we're making, and this will be my one pontification, is we have so many things domestically we could do. Oil, gas, nuke. We could be mining for metallurgical coal to make steel. We could be making our own steel. We could be doing all sorts of things here and doing it in the most legalistic and ethical way possible.
And green.
But we just won't do it because it's too problematic for Washington to give us the freedoms to do it domestically. So they'd rather dump it into Central Africa and be able to say, oh, you know how that is. And they'd much rather dump it on Latin America and say, oh, it's a lot easier thing to do, less problem. And I would love to see the United States incent base material and commodity businesses to come back to North America. And it doesn't just have to be the United States. It could be Mexico, Canada, and the United States. But let's start mining here, processing here, and building our own stuff again.
Well, and so that really is the answer, because to be brutally honest, Mike, you know this. I mean, we've got the capacity to be energy self-sufficient. We have the capacity to be food self-sufficient. We have the capacity to do a number of things that would allow us to re-onshore or return a lot of the manufacturing that we let slide off into other places at this particular point. What is it that Latin America has to offer us in the context of an industrial partnership that we couldn't achieve actually in the United States or somewhat closer to home without some of the vagaries of what's going on?
I'm not arguing that at all. What I'm trying to say is, if we have to make a choice between dislodging enemies like China, Iran, and Russia out of areas that are in our interest, whether it were Africa or whether it were Latin America, what choice should we make? Because we can't.
I think
we absolutely cannot do both.
I think we're resigned to playing the long game. It's not enough for us to go in and say, well, the Chinese built a copper mine. We're going to build a better one, and you're going to like ours better, okay? Because it's our copper mine, or our bridge is going to be better than the Chinese bridge or the standard gauge railroad or the port that they built. Oh, I don't think we can build a port as well as they can build port. They certainly have a hell of a lot more practice at building ports globally in the last 20 years than we do. And so I don't know that we're going to outgun them from an infrastructure influence investment perspective that we'll talk about in a bit. And so maybe we have to play the rope-a-dope game in terms of influence, and start to lay the seeds for changes that occur 10, 20 years from now. We don't do that very well.
I don't want. I didn't want to derail it because we were transitioning to Africa.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
No, this
That's just to be mindful.
No,
No,
this is a great conversation.
I think that paradigm pertains to Latin America. It pertains to Africa, both MENA and sub-Saharan.
It's just as relevant to Africa as it is to South America. And in fact,
absolutely.
In Africa, if you look at the trajectory of which we lost hegemonic power there, and what that means for anybody that doesn't necessarily understand or is familiar with the term, we no longer had the favorable influence over the governments of Africa, right? That began to wane, especially going into the late 90s to early 2000s. And China always had a presence there. All right. This goes back to the Rhodesian War. The Rhodesian War, you had two insurgent groups, Zanla and Zipra. And one was Soviet backed, the other one was People's Republic of China backed. And they were, going back to the days of Soldier of Fortune magazine and Lieutenant Colonel Brown and all of that in Rhodesia. One of the things that he and some of his authors were writing about was the fact that there were, at least at some level, there were American, I don't want to call them advisors, but there were observers that were watching the Chinese side and were at least saying, hey, this is going to have an end. This is going to have a favorable end one way or another. And we don't want the Soviet side obtaining power. And they were doing that through Mozambique, which had fallen into communist hands as well. Right. And so this was coinciding with the Sino-Soviet split just after Nixon's trip to China, just after how, the seeds of the industrialization of China, the Great Leap Forward, began. And we began to lose that hegemonic influence then. If you look at South America, so what a lot of people don't know, in the 1960s into the 1970s, a lot of focus was placed on Vietnam, obviously because it was such a pressing thing and very controversial here in the United States. But there was also a major fight that was going on in Central America and South America. And of course, we understand that going into the 1980s because of all of the communist revolutions that were happening, and then in turn, the counter revolutions that occurred. Well, if you look at the major hegemonic players in Central America and now in South America, they're all the same people, or at least many notable names of those communist insurgencies from that period of time. And we were fighting those brushfire wars in the 1960s as well, down there in Central America and South America, very much like
Danny, like Danny Noriega in Nicaragua.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, Daniel Ortega. Well, that you're thinking of Panama, but Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua.
Yeah, I said Noriega. I'm sorry.
Right. No. I mean, but
it was a Guinness moment. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm drinking Diplomatico actually, which is Venezuelan. But so we began to lose influence, and this really picked up steam with the in 2004 when Hugo Chavez came to power. Of course, Cuba was always the Soviet stronghold in our hemisphere. It was the thumb in the nose of the Monroe Doctrine, and the whole point behind that was the anti-Yankee imperialism, right? Because that's the language that they've traditionally used, and this is still the populist fervor that goes on in South America and Central America. There's an entire Marxist um, language that is used, and for anybody that wants to learn further about this, and read something that's kind of an academic context, and but I do enjoy stuff like that, because I do have a couple of advanced degrees in sociology and whatnot. But C. Wright Mills, and he wrote a book called Yankee Listen. And I've talked about him on my podcast with talking about the power elite and all of that, which is very, very important to read. But Yankee Listen was him essentially interviewing people from Cuba, and this was prior to the Cuban Revolution. But interviewing people from Cuba, interviewing people from Central America, and saying, hey, this is why the sentiment is like this. And if we don't do something to try and fix this, we're in for a lot of trouble that, headed down the road. Now, C. Wright Mills was a communist, and I understand that. But this is a very important thing, perspective. If you're trying to gain influence in a place, it's very important to understand what those people's perspective is and are and will be, and that's how you regain that. But we're not going to be able to do that. And if you look at, I don't think that we'll be able to do that in 50 years' time, because when you look at the trajectory of the leaders who have taken power, right? And this has really picked up rapidly over the past decade. Of course, we know that Hugo Chavez in 2004, the rise of Cristina Kirchner in Argentina, Gustavo Petro now in Colombia, which was our last real friend, actual friend and ally,
Right.
allied
Right.
nation in South America. Now we've lost that one, and now Brazil. So when you look at the totality of the circumstances there, and know that these are all countries, just as we've been talking about, you guys have been talking about, and I've just been listening and taking it in. We're not going to regain favor with them, and to couple all of this is the fact that their populism, their version of populism is well on the rise, and it is anti-American in message. And when you have at least half of Americans out there that are in governmental leadership positions who agree with that point of view, we're in real trouble.
Well, I think that explains, Matt. It explains, I think that's true in Africa. I think that's true in Latin America. And so what has that left us? And what it's left us is trying to squeeze the juice out of our colonial lemon in Europe. That's the only
Right.
place we've got relevance at this juncture. There and certainly in Japan because of our defense obligations. But I mean, from an economic perspective and other places, we're in the midst of recolonizing Europe. It's the Reconquista to a degree in terms of bailing out Europe, and that's great because there's some commonalities of mindset and what have you. But Europe's a place that's going to grow 0.5%. And has a bunch of legacy industries that we're not going to supplant or compete with or replace or anything else. It's just all we can do is try to extract value from that relationship in a way that it's going to be hard because the European bureaucrats themselves are trying to wring all the juice out of what's left in Europe. So it's a tough situation.
It is.
You've got to create an attractive scenario here in North America for them to come co-invest in bilateral thinking, right? And they were so into that multilateral world, and we bet long on it too. We being the kind of Washington intelligentsia.
Yeah.
And they're now terrified about having to back out of it, and they don't want it because they've figured out a way to monetize it. And, Ukraine is at the center of that long-term strategy right now.
Right. So back to sub-Saharan Africa. That was a good detour that we took. But let me come back to this. Sub-Saharan Africa, all the potential in the world, all of the political risk you would ever want, but ultimately is going to be the prize for the back half of this century, I think, in terms of where to generate economic growth. South Africa is sort of the basket child at this point, basket case in that scenario.
Can't even keep the lights on.
Can't even keep the lights on. And the other countries there are generating, albeit off of low bases, are generating some pretty impressive growth numbers, but they're fragile. In other words, it's a fragile growth structure there. There's a lot of things that can disrupt it. But for the long term, I think Africa is a place that we need to care about. But we just need to be much smarter about how we do it, rather than just taking the C-17 over there and throwing dollar bills out the back to whoever the 51 guys are who currently run those countries. We don't seem to have a strategy there either. Next slide.
Back to Mike's question. I mean, Africa has been a USAID/Pentagon lead place forever.
Yes.
And we have to transition it to a commercial participation play at some point. The difficulty has been the U.S. legalistic structure pretty much prohibited participation, and the security risks prohibited participation, right? So no Foreign Corrupt Practice Act violations. Government was lead in every country. So if you came into the country, they were watching you immediately because you were the outlander coming in. And it was just hard, right? Because you got to get down and dirty and get hands on. That's why if you look at Central Africa now, you've got all these Chinese coal miners. They're over there because they can play the game, right?
Yeah.
And some of them have been quite successful and have branched out, and they've gotten into things like cobalt and manganese and that all. And they've been there for decades, and as Matt was saying very clearly, the Chinese have been extremely active in Africa for decades and decades and decades. They went over as Maoist populist supporters, right? PLA brought weapons in and trained people in Lusaka and did all those things in the early days.
Well, see, that's what I was going to say, is that we're so ready to use the carrot in Africa, but China understands Africa and knows that the stick sometimes works better.
Well, and it's not even carrot and stick. It's just when somebody holds their hand out and says, "I need 10% for my brother," an American withers because we know that the FBI is going to be showing up at our front door and saying, "Hey, where'd that money go?"
Unless your last name is Biden, but yes.
No, but for the Chinese or the non-American, they're a more attractive mark for the locals now because they know that they're not going to get in that noise. And the U.S. aid keeps coming anyway, right? Even with all the corruption on the other side, the U.S. aid keeps coming because carrot, 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 right? We're in a really weird scenario in Africa, which is we're known as, kind of the goofy guys who show up, kill people, and then just hand money out.
Yep.
And we don't want anything. Pentagon really hasn't asked for anything. They show up, they secure the bases, they want the intelligence, they want to be able to fly the drones.
Well,
but are they dragging General Electric or anybody in? No.
You hit the point. I mean, there has to be a transition. The DoD guys are doing what DoD guys are authorized and supposed to do, and that's fine and dandy. I mean, that's great. But like you said, we have got to make that transition to be competitive in some kind of commercial negotiation. We have to, I'm not saying relax our standards, but we certainly have to adapt to these other places and not just take ourselves right out of the game. You know, and
Well,
if that's the
see,
case,
see,
if
the
that's
issue
the
is
case,
the issue is,
why
Mike,
are
is
we in there at all?
that's a good point. But the standards, what we've now seen through both the Clinton administration and the Biden administration, and I suspect we just haven't found it yet, the Obama administration. The Clinton Foundation was set up to do what? I mean, that's a rhetorical question. You know what it was set up to do. The Clintons left the White House stone broke. They stole the furniture, and now they're multimillionaires. And the Clinton Foundation is a grift machine, the Biden grift machine, and we've bifurcated this such that it's okay for our political class to be Roman governors of provinces and pillage them, but our corporate citizens have got to play by a set of rules that's impossible to comply with in the places that they're asked to go do things, because that same political class will turn around and crucify them if it turns out that somebody at Exxon paid for the second son of the third wife of some guy in Kazakhstan who's got an oil
Well,
concession
we
to go to
touched
school
on,
in Switzerland.
we touched on it earlier, and had before, I think.
Yeah.
We do it domestically too. You know, we can't pull lithium ores out of the United States, although they are physically there in abundance because of our environmentalists, you know, that are protecting us, and making the world safe, and you know, all that kind of stuff. So I mean, there's a lot of things we hamstring ourselves domestically and overseas.
Indeed. All right, let me go to the next slide so that we can make it out of here before Friday.
Before dawn.
Yeah. So can we flip back? I think we may have skipped one, but I'm not sure. Yeah. So we've talked about sort of the global outlook, and we've got some areas doing better than other. And so the big question is, what's going to happen in the U.S. economy in 2023? And I'm sorry to tell you this, but nobody really knows. If you have a few minutes, and I'm remiss in this because these slides are supposed to be ready to be available for download on a website, but I'm behind on that. But I will get caught up. But there's a link at the bottom of this at Bloomberg, and actually you can just go to Bloomberg and search it for Investment Outlook 2023. If you've got the time and you have the interest and you really want to get a sense of the fact that nobody really knows what's going to happen with the U.S. economy in 2023, we describe it here in this slide a little bit. And so in all the other charts, we had line graphs or bar graphs, and there was a direction and a form of what people thought was going to happen. Here it's a Jackson Pollock painting because anything is apparently possible. And no two investment banks, no two senior analysts seem to be coming up with consistent views as to what the likely outcome is, because there are variables in the U.S. economy that are difficult to predict as to how they're going to happen here. So it's a mess. I joked about this. There's 500 folks that they interviewed. There's probably 600 answers as to what's going to happen in 2023. But in the press and in the general reporting, what you see everybody sort of gravitating towards for public consumption is, soft landing, more and more likely, and we think inflation's peaked. And here's the real rub. They are bound in, if you've paid attention to our stock market since mid-summer of 2022, you have been bombarded with the thinking that says it's all going to be fine as soon as the Fed pivots from raising interest rates at the breakneck speed that it's been doing so for most of 2022. And once that happens, Hosanna, we're all going to be in a land of milk and honey with fat cattle and everything else. And I just don't think that's possible, because if we do that, it's going to be the same mistake that Paul Volcker made in the 70s when he had inflation on the run but didn't kill it and had to come back and double down on rate increases in the late 70s and early 80s. And I think that's the primary risk to the outcome in the United States is what's the Fed going to do from an interest rate perspective? And damned if they do and damned if they don't. So let's go to the next slide if I can, please. And here's the rub. This is what I think is the conundrum for Jay Powell and the folks at the Fed. And this looks like a daunting graph. It's not. Let's try to walk it through this for a minute. Wishful thinking on inflation. That yellow dot out in 2025 is sort of the current consensus of where inflation will be in most economists' projections relative to the U.S. economy. So within spitting distance of the Fed's 2% annual inflation target. And boy, wouldn't that be wonderful if it all worked just like they had drawn it up there. The problem you've got is that the white lines that you see are the trajectories that have to be achieved in order to start to make that happen, to make that happen. And those are rollovers that in a context that we'll talk about as we get through this, there's a lot of things that can upset that. Energy is probably first and foremost among them, but other aspects as well. And so we don't think, I happen to subscribe to the notion that I don't think we're going to see 2% inflation anytime soon. Or if we do, you're going to see it at a tremendous cost of damage to the U.S. economy, which is sort of what the next slide is. And that says the yellow line is sort of a trend line, not next slide, but the next, if I can actually go back.
The next image, yeah.
The right-hand image, my bad, I'm sorry. The yellow line there is the sort of trend line for GDP growth. And you see we had the COVID bust, and it's returned back to trend line pretty easily. But what that graph is showing you is that in order to get to a 2% inflation rate, we've got to squeeze that trend line back to the green dotted line, and we got to do that through raising interest rates. And I don't think anybody in the federal government has the stomach to do that.
There's a lot of area between those two lines.
That's a pretty good gap. And I think what that says is that the Fed's going to blink. Excuse me, which oddly enough, most investment banks are rooting for, that the Fed's going to blink, and that we're going to have inflation continue to hover in that between 4 and 6% X energy, X food. Well, if any of you eat or drive your car, you can tell me how that's worked out so far. So I think they're going to stare this in the face, and I think they're not going to do what they're going to need to do in order to put us back on a path to 2%. I think 3.5 or 4 is the new 2%.
Yep, and you'll have the election pressures pop in, and they'll panic.
Yes, and that is the other issue in the background is a presidential election cycle, which started yesterday with the inauguration of Ron DeSantis as the governor of Florida. So I think we're going to be told to feel good about this, and that if you liked inflation at 2, you're going to love it at 4, and it's going to be good enough for you guys. So next slide. And this has been one of the things, the left-hand image has been one of the things that's sort of buoyed the economy, and that is companies are deadly afraid of letting workers go. Although I saw that today Amazon has revised its number. It's going to shed 17,000 workers in the next couple of months, which will probably have an impact on those union organizing votes in Amazon facilities in the next couple of weeks. But the participation rate, that yellow line is the impact on the participation rate due to aging. So people getting out of the economy and not going back, not to work. So that's the boomers hanging it up and saying, we've got enough money. It may not be the retirement that we thought we were going to have, but it's the retirement we can live with. And I just don't want to put up with the assholes that I work with for another 4 or 5 years in order to make it up again. And so that demand for labor has kept this economy employed, but I think even that's going to break a little bit. And what you see here is the IMF's estimate is that inflation is going to move up to the 4.5, 4.6% by early 2025, which means between now and next year, we're going to start to see a little bit more unemployment. But keep in mind, those of you who lived through the Great Recession, we were in the 9.5% range for longer during that period of time. So by most measures, this is a pretty mild unemployment aspect.
I think my question though is where are these workers now? What are they doing for money? Because we know that it's not necessarily the aging people who have stepped off of there, but there's a lot of people, a lot of places looking for work, a lot of people not working. What are those people doing for money right now? It's this is just a mystery right now in the retail and service sector.
I'm going to ask Watcher to pull up this super chat that's in the YouTube.
Yeah.
Because I do not understand this. I have a snow bunny suit. I'm not the snow bunny chaser. We have a guy in this crew who is that, but the crew is ready to row, and Thad's. So I don't. I'm at a loss.
If you want to try that again in English, we would appreciate it.
We thank you for the $5. I'm not going to charge you again. If you want to just talk about it in the chat to sort of break that down into English, we're happy to talk about it. But
I think he basically just wants to see you in a snow bunny suit or something.
No, that's not my department. You're the head guy in that range. So, and it's your birthday, not mine. Next slide, please. This is the most concerning. The image on the left is the most concerning thing I've seen in this whole sort of review, and this is from Bank of America's research group. And it makes sense if you think it through, but to see the graphic nature of this, and this goes to Joe's point about, well, when are people going to be forced to go back to work? Because we've heard that the consumer's balance sheet is in great shape and the consumer's still sitting on stimulus money from COVID, which is not true. And so what does this show you? This shows you that in the last, year or so, and particularly this year, when the stock market gave back a lot of what it gained, we're at that point now where household assets, which is the dark blue line, has now crossed over on household liabilities. And that precipitous decline represents $22 trillion of asset value that has gone away. That going into a recession with any level of unemployment is a really dangerous combination. And the corollary to that, which if you look for it, you can find pretty easily, is credit card balance outstandings by household are ripping at an exponential pace at this point in order for people to maintain their normalcy bias. And that is, I've always bought the USDA prime ribeye at Costco, and I'm not going to step down to a cheaper cut of meat or this or that or whatever the equivalent is that is your affectation for I'm okay, you're okay, right? And then the other aspect of this, and this is just a function of mortgage rates having doubled in a 6-month period of time. That bright red line shows you the amount of decline of housing sales, and that occurred in a relatively short period of time relative to other declines in the housing market. So we fell out of bed in the housing market, and I think we've still got a long ways to go. In that regard,
I think you're going to see that take another turn downward.
Yeah. So I think, and this is if we manage through with this sort of soft landing sort of approach, or even a little bit worse, but it's not the hard landing that half the investment banks on the street are saying that we're likely to run into. So anything goes wrong from a geopolitical perspective or supply chain perspective, these things could get nastier as we get into 2023. So next slide, please. All right, this is the IMF, and I have a lot of issues with the methodology on this, but the message is clear. So the green line on the left is real GDP, or the red line is real GDP, and that is nominal GDP less inflation. And we're looking pretty European in terms of where that comes out in the not too distant future. And they have bought into the inflation's going to roll over and die as well. And I'm not sure that's going to happen. And one of the problems with that is, despite our expectations relative to a Republican majority in the House, they're projecting that we're going to get back to peak debt levels by mid-2025 that we saw in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And I don't think in a world where we're talking about 5.5–6% interest rates, something's going to give at the federal budget levels. Your favorite programs are going to have to be cut, because we're going to have to pay interest on all this $36 billion worth of, or $1 trillion worth of debt. And that's going to start to be painful. Yes, I think that's pretty much it. All right, next slide. All right, geopolitical risk. We touched on this. This is from BlackRock Investment Institute, and what you need to pay attention to here is the magnitude of the slope of the curve on the right-hand side of this graph, and that is, this is well after the invasion of Ukraine. We're now at sort of peak levels in terms of what they call their global risk score numbers. Some of this has to do with what we talked about a couple weeks ago, which was the potential for interdiction in Taiwan and the knock-on effect there. Some of it has to do with the continued sort of escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. Some of this has to do with the fact that we've got the Baskin Robbins 31 flavors of civil war breaking out across different aspects of this political uncertainty and what have you. And so however we got there, sober people at BlackRock Investment Institute judge that we're at sort of World War II levels of geopolitical risk, something that most folks alive today don't relate to because they weren't alive in 1939 or 1940 or 1941. And it's, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. I'm not going to come here and prognosticate what that looks like, but I am going to say that this has the capacity to upset or exacerbate any of the negative trends we've talked about, and may make it worse from that perspective.
Well, and I think too that one of the aspects here is that this chart points out that the world is kind of a shaky house of cards, and it's on a plastic table, right? That doesn't take much to push it over. I think that the biggest fat tail, like we've talked about, is that risk of just a blockade of Taiwan, not even an invasion. I really think that would send markets into a spiral and be crazy. But I wonder how this BlackRock geopolitical risk indicator matches up with the AutoZone Institute of Foreign Relations risk indicator.
To be more accurate, it's the AutoZone Institute for the Study of International Relations.
Oh, my bad.
We've got to figure out the acronym for that too.
Yeah.
When we have a minute, I haven't talked to the thinkers at the think tank there, the AutoZone think tank, in a while. So I'm
something nuclear war.
Yeah,
is the answer.
Kill all the Russians, kill all the Chinese. I think that's it. So, all right. So Jace up for 10. If China blockades Taiwan, all global finance becomes the Wild West. Well, we talked about that. In fact, we did 2 hours on that on the 14th of December, and we'll tie that back in because the disruption to physical trade is enormous. The disruption to financial markets is enormous, and the asymmetric aspect of cyber attacks on certain key financial infrastructure areas is killer stuff in a lot of ways. So I think this takes us to a little bit of a pause in our slide deck. If I can get to the next slide. It does. So we're going to take a little bit of an intermission. People can get a drink. We can let Joe talk about tactical wisdom. We can let Mike talk about the Warlock series, or we can just make fun of Kevin McCarthy, which would be my want. And because I think old Kev was left home alone again today. Yeah, but
Poor guy, having a rough day. He's like, "Aren't any of you people my friends?" And they're all like, "Nah, bro, don't even like you."
Well,
yeah, I have great respect for Chip Roy, and Brian Donalds and Rick Perry. Rick, is it Perry, or who's the guy from Pennsylvania?
It's not Rick Perry.
No, but it's
Fetterman.
No. It is a Republican. Yeah. John Fetterman.
Fetterman is the mute.
He's my dude. But these 20 people, including some freshman congresswomen who have never served, have never been sworn in. This is Herodotus at the bridge, or Leonidas at Thermopylae. What they've chosen to do in terms of drawing a line and saying we're not doing this anymore the way we did it. You're not going to shove down a $1.7 trillion omnibus bill down our throats anymore. The people that voted for us aren't going to take this anymore. And Kevin, we don't trust you as far as we can throw you. So we're going to have new rules. I think that's I think that's brave shit. It really is, because if they don't win, they've signed their own political death warrants. And I heard one of them today say, "I don't care. I can go back. I can go home and make a living. I don't give a shit about this. I'm here to do what I'm here to do." And we have begged for people to have that mindset. We've begged for people to have the stones to do that. And now we've got 20 people here who are ballsy as shit, and are just saying, you know what, we're gonna die. We're gonna die with our, on our. We're gonna come home either victorious or on our shields, and so be it. And I'm all for it. I think Chip Roy should be the Speaker of the House, in my opinion. But if he's not, then I want him empowered to the greatest extent possible.
So, except for, I think you mentioned there were a couple freshmen, just got sworn in, whatever. And that's great. But let's just say the majority of everyone involved. The only caveat to the whole saga that I would have liked to have seen was right after the elections, in anticipation of this coming. These people, these dissidents, should have been shaking the trees hard and trying to create a coalition, starting then, not starting yesterday after the first vote, and at least had, name number one is the top of our list, and then name number two, and we've already kind of started talking to people about XYZ. That's the only thing I think is kind of unfortunate about this shooting at the hip on the fly. It's a great effort. I understand it completely. It's just that they should have had a plan on how to proceed once they enacted, the strategy. That's just
I think what that demonstrates, though, Mike, is the extent to which any political talent that has the experience to be speaker has been co-opted by the Vichy GOP. I don't know who I would pick. I actually do. If it's
you said Steve Scalise. I mean, there's a valid guy.
Yeah, but I'm not even so sure I would trust Scalise at this point, and that's a horrible thing to say. But I think Scalise would be the value of Scalise is that there's less people who just don't like him because he's Steve Scalise then there's a lot of people who don't like Kevin McCarthy because he's Kevin McCarthy. And so I think that if it's not one of the 20, I think they ought to jump the shark and put Lee Zeldin's name forward as the speaker.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the selection of whoever could be quite simple based on the objective of, we don't want to do this way again. We don't want to go down this road anymore. And it's very simple to discern who is on the right side of things by looking at the voting record. And you can just say, eliminate 1, 2, 3, 4, go down the list, eliminate that motherfucker, eliminate that motherfucker, eliminate that motherfucker. And, these 3 pure souls make the cut.
But one of the things, go forward with them. One of the things about the position of the speaker is you're third in line to the presidency, and so there's an element of who would you trust in that role, and that's one of the reasons I don't trust Kevin McCarthy. Nope. But who is it? Who is it? Jim Jordan? I mean, who would you want in that role? And that list gets pretty short pretty quick, and that's just the way it is. But I mean, you've got an 80-year-old dementia patient, and you've got Kamala Harris, who's a box of chocolates. You don't know what she's going to be on any given day, and so being third in line to the presidency has some importance in that scenario. And so that's got to get factored into this. But God forbid, I wouldn't want Kevin McCarthy to become president of the United States by being speaker. That's
now I know who you mean by Zeldin. From a point of view of character, he's probably very good. The only problem, I think, is in that specific position, you have to know how the game is played as far as the rules and how to do the.
Lee's been a congressman from New York for a long time.
Yeah, I forgot that. Yeah, I'm just that's just one of those kind of requirements that the guy
he's got the House floor experience to do the job, and the fact that he doesn't have to run for re-election for anything but speaker, actually is sort of a really interesting scenario, because we've always talked about people who the problem with the Congress is that there's never not an election season. On January 4th, they're making calls to raise money for the next 2024 cycle. And if you don't have to do that, that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me is that these guys tried to bum rush this. Oh, there are 4 or 5 people we gotta kind of pull along, but we're going to be just fine. It's all, it's in the bag, it's in the bag, it's in the bag. And then lo and behold, there was a lot of discord in the party. And I think that the media was heavily involved in McCarthy's the only option. Everybody's going to have to get on board. They're all bent out of shape. The media seems to be the most morose about this, which I find just intriguing.
That is confirmation of the fact that you can't trust Kevin McCarthy. and the point is, we did this once. We did this exact play, and Kevin backed out. He was unelectable to take Boehner's place, and we hired Paul Ryan, who said he didn't want the job, and look what that yielded.
Yeah,
both as a speaker and as a VP candidate with Ron. I won't even say his name. He whose name cannot be spoken. To me, it's all about purity on ideology. We've done the big statesman, where it's for the best of the country, and Mitch the Turtle was in Covington, Kentucky, playing that out today. That son of a bitch. And so to me, my bias is towards ideological purity. I'm not looking for the guy who wants to use the speaker's office as the springboard to the presidency. I'm looking for these guys who say, we're here to do the will of the people. The devil take the hindmost.
That is exactly correct. That's exactly what is needed. We need a warlock as a fucking speaker. That's exactly
And
what's
if I'm
needed.
Chip Roy, I'm happy to go back to Texas
Yes.
and not darken the doors. So anyhow, anything else we want to cover in intermission? Anything just more lighter
Well,
topic than any of this stuff?
well, I'd
We
like
can't
to.
sell any. We can't sell any more
One thing.
books for you. You can't print those books fast enough to keep up with the demand on the
Well,
Baofeng radio.
I'm blessed in that regard. I am. I didn't expect to sell
No,
100 of
you
them.
earned it. You earned it. So.
Well, thank you. But this story that I retweeted earlier today, coming from freshman Congressman R.C. Maxwell, and I thought that this was extremely important and seemed to get ignored everyone. But it's a picture of him and Maxine Waters, and he said Maxine Waters just told me to quit my bitching and support Kevin McCarthy or else. That he has in all caps. I don't think that there is a better example out there of the uniparty that is going on behind closed doors.
Hey,
This
Matt.
is something. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I think Barbara Vance in the chat, she talks about the AOC, trying to come up with some kind of co-joined, party kind of deal. I mean that that almost takes a cake over the Maxine Water ones you're talking about. That's the kind of shit that's going on.
It is. And no, I mean she's exactly right. It is the uniparty is real. And I just want to take a moment to point that out. That's a drum that I've been beating for years now, that all politics is local, that you need to focus. DC, the way that I look at DC, the swamp, the deep state, the power elite, whatever the heck you want to call it, right? Doesn't matter. Okay. They are removed largely from our ability to influence what happens there, right? But your local school board, you do have influence there, right? That's why the DOJ went after the people who were showing up to the school board meetings. That's the reason they did that, because they know that that's a real threat, right? When you show up, and I don't mean a threat as in you're going to go up there and you're going to be a menace, but the fact that you're showing up, the fact that you're saying no, hey, we don't go along with this, right? We're not going to toe this line. Northern Virginia was a great testing ground for that. A great now the results from that, Glenn Youngkin being elected, that didn't really anybody that's familiar with the politics of Virginia knows that Glenn Youngkin was kind of a milquetoast at best. Okay, whatever, right? But the point is that you show up at the local most level, you absolutely will have an influence. And when I tweeted some things out today about that, and I've talked about this a lot in the past. I've done podcasts on it. I have written about it. And really a lot from what I saw with the Iraqi insurgency, how they were able to gain favor and maintain favor, how the Taliban was able to gain favor and maintain favor. And folks, I understand that may have a negative connotation. The results speak for itself. They won.
Yeah.
Okay. They won.
Yeah.
And they operated at the local most level. So if you show up to those county commissioner meetings, if you know, and this is something I used to point out to CJ students, criminal justice students, first year and second year criminal justice students, how many of you know who your district attorney is? Because they wield the most power in your county. And how many Americans out there do not know that? They think the sheriff does. It's not the sheriff. It's the district attorney.
Yeah, the district attorney gets to approve or decline whatever the sheriff does. So
exactly. So get involved in that process. At the end of the day, for all the showing up and the waving signs and whatever, and you're angry, hey, that's fine. Why don't you become a political donor? Why don't you do that? A lot of people in the prepper world talk about, putting away food and the ammo and all that stuff, right? And I talk about that stuff too. But donating to local campaigns, that guy that's running for the county commissioner's seat, throw him a couple $100, and get his phone number, and he got your phone number, and you're from the same place, and now you are a person, and now you have a little bit of influence there, right? To say, hey man, I contributed to your campaign. That's right. You'll pick up the phone when I call you. And that's how the left gained traction in the United States. That's how they did it through the 1980s. They laid the groundwork for that into the 90s. And now we are where
Can
we
I
are
make
now.
one of my famous historical points on this? That's exactly the way the founding fathers envisioned the legislature to operate. That person didn't go there to push their own ideas and their own thoughts. They would go meet with the rest of the House, find out what the issues were, return to their district, and ask the people who lived there what they wanted them to do. They didn't just do what they wanted to do or what their party told them to do. They went back and did what the actual constituents did. That's what we're supposed to have. We don't have that.
Yeah, I listen to these guys guys and gals who talk about, I've come to Washington and I'm going to vote my conscience. Fuck you. You're not there to vote your conscience.
You're there to vote my conscience.
Right.
Exactly right. You're there to be a channel for my conscience and the others who are responsible for having.
That's why I'm so disgusted every time I write to Senator Stabenow, and she sends me back a letter that says, "Thanks for your opinion, but I really don't care." It's annoying, but I'm going to keep doing it because it's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. So I got a little catch up to do here. Kevin, thank you very much for the for the New Year's gratuity for the effort. We appreciate it a great deal. And I think Jay Supp is onto something here. And I think this goes to Mike's point about, well, why didn't they have a candidate? I do think that they realized. I think the goals of this insurgency, and I use that word, this political insurgency as it relates to the speaker, is not that they think that any of these guys, it's Scott Perry, that somebody corrected me in the chat, that Scott Perry and the rest of these guys think that they can get 218 votes. I don't think they're not that delusional, right? But what they've decided to do is that if we have to live with Kevin McCarthy, he's got to be in a gimp suit on a short leash. That's what they're trying to achieve in the context of guaranteed positions on key committees and writing the rules of the House in such a way that the sleight of hand machine that Nancy Pelosi built can't be copied and pasted to a Republican speaker, because they don't want Kevin to have that much power, because they don't trust him with it, and they're right not to.
Right.
The only caveat I have to that is, and I'm thinking in terms of this AOC cornering, some Bubba, one of them, and having this discussion about a
Yeah, that's agent provocateur stuff.
I mean, that's all absolute crap. But if this guy and that bunch of people are that desperate that they go across the aisle and they make changes to these rules, etc., to acquiesce to the Democratic Party's wishes, this insurgent element needs to pull out all stops and go absolutely fucking ballistic.
I think we're one level above where we need to be, and that is I think this is all a holding action in terms of keeping it from getting worse. Republican Party is dead, and many of you have heard me say that. It is dead. And I don't know what comes next, and it's going to be hard to build it. It's going to be expensive to build it, and it's going to take time. But continuing to try to pump air into the busted tire tube that is the GOP is a waste of time and effort. And this demonstrates, I think, that in spades, if you're paying attention. And I like I said, God bless these guys and gals who are willing to take this stand. And I'm happy to support them and happy to do whatever I can to help them. But this really is Thermopylae. They're not going to be there when the ultimate victory occurs. They're all going to be on their shields and dead politically. But at some point, you know, that you're gonna have the ultimate victory that they bought the time for in order to make it happen.
Hey, my fever is starting to come back, so I'm gonna punch out.
Okay.
And I don't think we're halfway through the slide deck, but
Yeah, we are. We'll go quickly at this particular point, but if you need to hit the ripcord, take 2 Tylenol, go to bed.
Yeah. Hey, and before I forget, Crystal Hut is what I was talking about earlier. It's on the Crystal lift line. You
Okay.
know,
That sounded like a dancer's name.
I know. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Club again?
I'm talking about skiing, baby. Whistler, baby.
She's gonna
So
be dancing
if
this
anyone was listening to me, ramble on about that Crystal place is awesome. There you go.
All righty. Be well, bud.
Buy my books, 1, and 2. If you bought my books, write some damn reviews. There we go. Good night.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask you to, and I'll talk to you about this later. Next week, this is a little bit out of order, but next week we're doing the southern border, and I've been waiting for this for a long time. And we'll probably only do this on Rumble because I guarantee you I will get us X'd out on YouTube. But I'd like you to give some thought to that because the show title is "So You Want to Be a Sicario," but it's going to be lit. I can guarantee you. So feel better, and we'll talk soon.
I'm telling you, that is the
night.
best scene. Yeah, good night, Mike. That is the best scene out of both movies.
Yeah.
So you want to be a Sicario, and he closes the door. The kid is like, "I'm dead. This dude's finna kill me." But classic.
All right, let's get back into this. And I know people got places to go and things to do. I think we can make this in a little bit more expedited fashion. So here's the background. The first several slides gives you a picture of the sort of uncertainty from an economic perspective, not just in the United States, but globally. And then adding on to that is the fact that we in the West and also now the Chinese to a great degree have perfected the weaponization of finance as another tool of power projection, and our starting point on this chain of value is sanctions, and we tend to use sanctions, and we tend to do sanctions in the same bloody places, and nothing much really changes in that context. So what this is meant to do is to show you that in 2014, which was the Obama administration, this is where we in the UN had sanctions, and you can sort of study this. It's financial sanctions and a whole range of other things where we were offended that countries were exercising their sovereignty. And it's the same cast of characters. It's Sudan and Libya and Democratic Republic of Congo. And
as I always point out, these are characters who we put travel bans on people who don't come here, and we put arms embargo on people who don't buy arms from us. They're words on paper. They mean nothing.
And this is, and then again, if you come up to the first year of the Biden administration, it's the same cast of characters now with Mexico and Venezuela added in, and China added in, and Saudi Arabia, that's smart, added in, and Yemen, and so this is before the Ukraine invasion and the trillions of sanctions that we've imposed, many of which have sort of backfired on us and actually played into the Russians' hands from an economic perspective, and by collateral damage the Europeans and ourselves to a greater degree than the intended target. So I think we have shown definitively that sanctions, and North Korea is always on that list as well, that sanctions haven't done much to do anything in terms of changing behavior and Iran's another great example. We've sanctioned everything that moves in Iran, but the Ayatollahs are still there, and I don't think they're going anywhere despite the stuff that's going on in the streets to a degree. Next slide, please. we're not going to spend a lot of time on tariffs. We've all lived through the tariff side, but tariffs, from time to time, people get sort of wrapped up about using tariffs. I think Trump did a good job with the Chinese tariffs because he just showed the Chinese he was serious about this. Biden has been less so, but tariffs are another tool that we use to weaponize financial interactions. Most of, if I can go back to that prior slide for just a minute, Watcher, I apologize for this. Most of our sanctions tend to play off of the central nature of the US dollar to the world financial system. That's our lever, whether it's prohibiting people from conducting business on SWIFT, which is the bank clearing system, or other aspects where we've leveraged the central nature of the US dollar. That tends to be sort of where our activity occurs. So if we can click forward 2 slides then, please. And we buy influence. Mike talked about this a little bit, military and financial aid. In 2018, our budget was $50 billion, $16 billion in military assistance, and $34 billion in gender studies programs in Pakistan and things of that nature.
That's where you got female suicide bombers from, by the way.
I know. And so we don't get a lot for this. This goes back to the seriousness of our investment in international aid, and we don't get a lot for it. And now we fast forward to this year and last, we've committed 147 billion just in military aid to Ukraine, and there's no end in sight. Next slide. And then this is how the Chinese do it. They'll lend you money to build real stuff that they end up controlling. And I could spend hours on this slide, but I'm not going to do that. And we've touched on this. The blue dots on the South American slide are transport infrastructure, ports and railroads and airports.
All of which has a military purpose.
All of which does. In Africa, we've talked a bit about that. It's railroads and mines and ports again. And then that other slide is the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which looks to be consuming most of the planet. All the various colors are denominated as to when those countries signed the MOUs with the Chinese government for Belt and Road. So, commodity crusades, China reopening is going to have an impact, even if it's sloppy, even if it's messy, even if it's not on the road back to 8% GDP growth. And if you're in tune to this, Francisco Blanch at B of A he and Jeff Curry at Goldman Sachs are the two best commodity analysts, I think, on the street. And Francisco's been right a lot on the oil market. And he says energy is going to, in a world where the Fed doesn't go all the way and stop inflation, and in a world where the Chinese economy reopens, that oil is going to go back up to 100 and 125 bucks a barrel, maybe 150 if there's any sort of geopolitical fallout like Taiwan, and that inflation's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And in the meantime, the Russians are building pipelines to Asia, having had their pipelines to Europe sabotaged by NATO. And then the next slide. And this is one you got to pay attention to. Now, I get involved in conversations with people on Twitter all the time who tell me, the dollar's not going anywhere. And my response tends to be, I never said that it was anytime soon. This is not going to be, you're not going to wake up on a Monday when coming off a weekend and the Wall Street Journal is going to tell you that your dollar is worthless. But this is a concerted effort that has been underway, that has made great strides in the last 12 months to offer a substantive alternative to the dollar as a unit of trade. Both, it starts in hydrocarbons, but we'll go from there. And the Saudis are going to play a very important role in that. and the Saudis are buddy with Xi Jinping on the heels of 3 or 4 days of meetings in Riyadh. And this is an article from the Financial Times, and the Financial Times is saying, this is the birth of the petro yuan. I happen to think that we're going to end up with a basket of currencies. We can talk about South America and what's going on in Brazil, but it's getting late, and we can circle back at this on another time. But our ability to spend the money that we spend on our military and its force projection overseas and gender studies programs in Pakistan and our unfunded liabilities at home is predicated on the ability for us to sell treasury debt instruments with impunity, because people have to have dollars in order to conduct other economic actions in the marketplace. And to the extent that is constrained, our relative financial power is going to be constrained as well. And we could probably do a whole show on this, and might, but you just need to watch this space, because I think what you're going to do is look around in 2030 and say, what happened? And I think it'll take that long for this to occur. But we're on this glide path, absent some additional action on our part. And my favorite is asset seizures under legal pretense. Now, down there in the lower left-hand corner is a headline from Reuters in May, where St. Janet Yellen, she of the Federal Reserve and now the Secretary of the Treasury, she who cannot be questioned, she who has proven not to be transitory in the context of her role in the Biden administration, has said that we the United States have no legal basis to seize, even though we've frozen them, seize Russian central bank assets on deposit in New York. That has not stopped the Europeans from taking or considering taking what I think is going to be the escalation that cuts Putin loose in terms of asymmetric or cyber or any sorts of other aspects. And that is to seize Russian central bank assets on deposit in Frankfurt, in Germany, in wherever, and then directing that money to Ukraine. Because there is no legal construct for anybody to do that. It is the ultimate in highway brigandry.
There's also no legal basis for the essentially issuing the letter of marque that they did that said that anyone may seize a Russian oligarch's yacht. There's literally no legal basis for that, but
yeah, no, those things tend to get lost in the fervor from time to time. And that's where we are there. And even singling out these guys like Roman Abramovich, his soccer team or his basketball team or whatever else, or one of his 6 yachts. I think all this does is it paints we in the West as unreliable partners, no matter what. Because you have to remember, you have to remember, we weren't always allies with the Japanese. Now that may be news to some of y'all, but we weren't always allies with the Germans. We weren't always allies with the British. Yeah, we fought 2 wars with them, including one where they burned the White House in 1812. And so we weren't always allies with the Vietnamese, but yet we're pretty damn close to being allies with the Vietnamese today, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And we are willy-nilly making up ways to destabilize the financial systems that we've spent 80 years building since Bretton Woods. And while we burn our house down, we're going to look around and say, well, wait a minute, how come we can't do the stuff we used to do? And I'm shorthanding this because we're long on time, but that's sort of where we are. Next slide. Conclusions. I have never seen the level of uncertainty, and I've been at this for a while, that we have going into 2023 in terms of the various economic outcomes. And I was reminded of something by a good friend of mine, or Colonel Mosby, who couldn't be on tonight. But every great societal upheaval, reformation, or world war has been preceded by three horsemen: a health crisis, a political crisis, and an economic crisis. And I think we're 3 for 3 in the last 24
Oh, yeah.
months. And so I think we believe that you have to be nimble going forward into 2023. You have to be as put together as you can be in terms of not being overexposed to the potential ramifications of what could be political, economic, and geopolitical upheaval that could occur. And 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 I think what really gives me pause is that the crew in the White House is really likely to make every miscalculation necessary to exacerbate this outcome, so that Joe. It looks like Joe's going to announce he's going to run for 2024. It may be fait accompli by this time next year. That may be a dead horse, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that in the literal sense, but so that's kind of how we see 2023. There's a lot of downside risk in 2023, much more so than the upside risk, and I hope that you're thinking about that. I hope that you're prepared to deal with it. You still got some time. I think by June, if your house isn't in order, I think you're exposed. And maybe we can talk about what some of the steps are to do that at some future point. It's almost financial prepping, if you will. And we're not going to offer you financial advice, but there's certain things that you can do to make sure that you're less exposed to what could happen here, and that you're not taking on a bunch of debt or borrowing or anything else at a time when interest rates have still got a long ways to go, and probably going to be high for a while. So I'd like to thank everybody for spending out some time. We started this by saying that we try to do these in 90 minutes. We've not been very good about that in the last couple of weeks. We're going to try to be a bit more, and I won't promise it for next week, because this topic is near and dear to my heart, and we'll probably spend a lot of time on what I think has to be done in terms of coming to terms with Mexico before Mexico joins up with the Mercosur Bolivar army and comes to terms with us, or the cartels do it on their behalf. So if you've got topics or aspects of a topic that you want us to make sure that we touch on, for instance, in a show like next week, you can DM us. I think most of you follow us on Twitter. You can certainly DM me, and I'll take responsibility for doing that. And if we think it's not something that we weren't going to cover, or we want to cover it in a different way, or you want to suggest a different way, we're happy to take that on as well, and talk about aspects of this. This is I would like to find a way to make this more interactive. I'm not quite sure how we do that, but I'd like to make it more interactive, and not necessarily just as a function of a super chat. Maybe one of these days, if Twitter makes it, if you can do sort of video spaces, maybe that'll be the way to be able to do that. But we'll see. But thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate it. I know all the guys appreciate it. And keep your eyes open for a Dance with the Devils. I can never remember the title of this book. Dancing with
I thought it was Dance of the Devils, or
Dance of the Devils, Mongol Moon Part 2, whatever. And kudos to Sibley for getting her done. So thanks and good evening. We'll see you again next week. If you're going to join us on future conflict on Friday, I think that's going to be a bit of a preview. It's a domestic segment, which again probably will be just on Rumble, but that's not my call. And we'll go from there. In the meantime, if you're so inclined, pick up the phone and call any of these guys that are sort of sticking it out up there. I know I've left a couple messages for Chip Roy and a couple of the other folks that I think are standing up for our interests, and And I'm not talking about the violent overthrow of the government. I'm just talking about returning the government to those who are meant to control the government, which is the people of the United States. So let's go. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Good night, y'all.